Hello and welcome. I'm Drew Brockbank. I'm an official Zoho consulting partner, and I've helped over 141 organizations implement Zoho. In this video, I'm going to share with you how Zoho can automate your business, integrate your tech stack, and work for you instead of you having to work for Zoho. But to be honest with you, you don't even have a shot at any of those things unless you understand these 7 principles. The number one thing that you have to understand is task technology fit theory. Now, before I go into what that is, I want you to understand the situation in which this is relevant. So many times my clients will come to me and they'll say, okay, we're excited about Zoho. There's all these capabilities. We're in over our head. We're out of our depth. How do we get started? And this is a really big question. And the answer is with the steps in your organization. You must start with the processes. Now, if you don't have processes, that should be your first thing to figure out. What are the steps in your organization? Luckily for you, I've noticed this is a giant issue, so I make YouTube videos inspiring clients on what steps they should take in their organization to complete things, such as their marketing tasks, their sales tasks, their service, customer success tasks, and much more. So the first part of this channel really is to give inspiration as to what your processes should be. Okay, once you know your processes, step 2 is understanding how do you present these? How do you document these processes in a way that makes sense? Fortunate for you, I have seen every variation under the sun of how to document processes. And I've landed on this form of process documentation bullet point format. Now, the temptation, I know exactly what you're thinking because I've seen this done 1,000 times, is to create some kind of flowchart, okay? So I don't hate flowcharts, but they just don't contain enough detail. Now, this is an ERD. Usually someone's got a flowchart with a bunch of boxes, step by step, walking people through the processes. But here, there's a couple problems with visual documentation such as flowcharts, okay? Number one, they don't contain enough information to base the implementation off of, okay? That's the first thing. It just simply doesn't have enough detail to hand over to someone and then transfer exactly what you want them to do with the system. So that's the first flaw. The second one is you're never going to update it. Processes change over time. They are not set in stone. So you need something that is modifiable, or in other words, some kind of document that you will refer to, back to. And number 2, you will actually change over time. Number 3, I've also noticed that unless people use BPMN 2.0, that's a almost like a flowchart language for explaining business processes, people don't understand what the flowchart is because people just invent their own way of creating them, which means that person who created it is always necessary. It's not universally understood, is what I'm trying to say. And so that's a major issue as well. It's usually not universally understood, even if it is in BPMN 2.0. Most people don't even know. Do you know what that is? When I say that, are you like, oh yeah, BPMN 2.0? People don't know what that is. I can tell you right now, this documentation, anyone can read it. It's who will what. So who, which is the actor in the process, the actor can be a person or a thing, such as Zoho. And it's what they will do. And it's written like a story. This is universally understood. This is also how all standard operating procedures should be made as well. And the nice thing about documenting this is once you document the system, it also serves as a standard operating procedure. And so this brings us back to task technology fit theory, which states, if your tasks or the steps that you take in your organization to do things such as marketing, sales, operations, finance, whatever it might be, are out of alignment with your technology. When I say alignment, I mean if you can't perform the task well inside of the technology, then you are not going to be successful in it. That might seem obvious to you, but if that is true, then the question is, how do we document our processes and match that against the system we're trying to get into, which would be Zoho? And this principle, task technology fit theory, applies to any software program. Actually, it applies to most things in general, but especially to Zoho. It's hyper relevant to Zoho. So if you believe in task technology fit theory, which I do, and I recommend you believe in as well, then the next obvious question is, how do we understand our processes? And then how do we understand if they match Zoho? So this is the way to represent your processes. Now you may be thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to go create this document. I suggest that you don't. You can use this for inspiration. If you look at my Zoho for B2C or Zoho for B2B videos, I have a document like this that guides, the video, especially in the Zoho B2C one. So you can try to mimic this for yourself. But what you should do is find the best steps to perform the task that you want, either from people in your industry, but usually they don't give it to you. That's the thing. Like, operations is so different from marketing and sales because you can call up a competitor, go through their sales process. You can go on the Facebook ad library and look at people's ads and kind of deconstruct their funnel. You can do those things because it's visible, but everything after that, you don't really get to see what happens behind closed doors inside the operations. You don't know, but I do, because I've seen it 141 times with over 141 organizations. I've seen exactly how they do things. So over time, I've started to collect these different processes that actually work and scale well, and then I share it with my other clients, and then I share them in these videos for you. So that's the thing. If you want to create this document, you can. I'm just not confident. I've seen clients come to me with them, and I look at them and I'm like, there's so many more better ways to do the processes that you're trying to do. So on one half, think of it like a Venn diagram that we're trying to shove together so that there's complete overlap. We're trying to get the circle on the left, which is the steps in the organization, which you're looking at now. And then what I do is underneath steps in the customer journey or processes that the business undergoes, or the steps that they take to complete a process, I'll also put what Zoho should be doing to support them. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking this circle, which represents the processes or the steps in the organization, and I'm taking the circle which represents Zoho, and I'm shoving them together so that there is a match. For every step, there is a match. Now, if you don't know processes, then you are not equipped to make this documentation. However, if you are completely clear on your processes, then you can create this document. I will say, I just have to hammer this home. It is helpful to go to somebody who understands processes extremely well and Zoho extremely well, because then they will be able to line up all the actions that you should be taking in your business to accomplish different objectives, such as increasing hitting your marketing KPIs, increasing your sales, and doing better at customer service and any other operations that you're wanting supported by Zoho. Let's just say that you have some kind of document like this representing your processes, or you already know your processes like the back of your hand. What's the next step once you have this done? How do you get Zoho to automate your business, integrate your tech stack, be your dream system, work for you instead of you working for Zoho? That's a huge promise, and you probably think, how is Drew going to know even where to begin with that? Well, the hard work really is the documentation. It makes everything much easier. It's not perfect, but no method of documentation is perfect. Each of them have their drawbacks. This is simply the best one. Okay, so once you get this, what is the next step to get the dream system? And the best way to do it is optimize, automate, delegate, OAD. So optimize is when you have a process like this, you want to make sure that the process is optimized. Now, that's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and people are like, what does it actually mean? Well, it's optimal, it's the ideal, it's the best way for a process to work for both your business and for Zoho. Okay, because there's some processes that might work perfect for the business, but they don't work for Zoho. They wouldn't work in Zoho. Zoho just won't support those processes. There's some processes that work perfect in Zoho, but they're not relevant to your business at all. There's a million things you can do in Zoho, none of which are worth doing unless they support the tasks that you're performing in the organization. You might think to yourself, well, I'm a business owner and I'm looking, or I'm a leader and I'm looking down on the system through the lens of reports. So that's not a task. Well, that is a task. You're taking a step in the system to do something. The step you're taking is to look at different reports so that you can gather information and make informed decisions. So what I'm trying to say here is once you have your documentation written out, the next step for taking your steps and putting your process into Zoho, which is the right way to do it. Okay, I've seen this done 141 times. You're just going to have to take my word for it that the way to start is not with going through Zoho and then making up your processes. It's actually to have your processes written out first and then put them into Zoho. That might seem contradictory to optimization, but that is the art of optimization. It's the halfway point between your processes optimal processes and optimal Zoho best practices, and then mixing those together. So some people will start with Zoho and then they will try to invent their processes from that. I've never seen that work. Okay. Also, I'm in a weird situation where most people come to me when they need help. So maybe there are people making that work. I've never seen it done. I've never been able to do that. And all I do is work with software all day. Okay. So that's important to understand. If you start with processes first, then you can put a strategy together before you get in over your head and out of your depth, which you will if you jump into Zoho first and try to invent things from there. So write out your processes, get a plan, and then implement Zoho. Most people come to me after they have a free trial in Zoho. They try to do it themselves and they realize they're never going to get anything done. And they're right, because that's what happens. Or they really jump the gun. They try to develop Zoho and then they come back to me a year later and they're like, I've ruined this thing. I want to start from scratch. I hate that I ruined it. I know it can do a lot for me. And it frustrates me that other people are getting a lot out of this when I know that I'm not even scratching the surface. I digress. Optimization, automation, delegation. So first, you need to find the optimal processes. Okay, so at first, you're going to take really raw notes. You're going to go through this, or you're going to have an expert do it for you. For example, I do this for my clients when they're talking to me. I want to know everything. I'm like, load me up with everything you got that's relevant to Zoho or semi-relevant to Zoho. I take all these raw notes in bulleted point format. Actually, I take those notes in bulleted point format as I have a tool that transcribes what they're saying and then uses AI to take the transcription of my notes and then merge them together. That's just kind of a cool note. But I take the raw notes first, and then I go through and I order it together. Now, this is one of the drawbacks of this documentation. There's a lot of pros, but this is one con, is with this style of documentation, it's hard to see the splits. Okay, so you have a process that's linear like this, and no process is linear, but you've got to document it somehow, right? So you have like the ideal path of a process, right? Someone hops on the website. I'm giving you an example. This might not apply to your business, okay? You can translate it to your actual business. Someone hops on your website, they fill out the form, they hop on a call with you, they request a proposal, you send the proposal. For B2C, it might look like you run an ad, they click the ad, they jump on your website, they like a product, they purchase the product, and they purchase 10 more, whatever it is, okay? And there's offshoots of that. It's not always ideal. You do want the ideal path first, though. You want a path where revenue can actually, you can actually complete the full customer journey at the ideal first. You need that at a baseline or you can't even get money, okay? So that's the first, is you need that ideal path. Ideal, let's see if I can draw a straight line. This is hard, okay? I'm using my trackpad. Ideal path. Pretend that was straight. You need the ideal path first. Then you can start dealing with all the offshoots along the path, okay? And so this form of documentation struggles with the offshoots is what I'm trying to say. You can still do it, but this documentation is perfect for the ideal path. Okay, it's great for the ideal path. And you need the ideal path first, and then you can start dealing with offshoots. When people go for the first offshoot and then they say, and this can happen, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I'm like, let's just get the ideal path for how this can work. And instead of flooding a system that looks like this, that's like on an offshoot, like you have this random situation where it's like, well, maybe they hop on the website and then they leave, and then I want to do retargeting and all of this. And I'm like, we can go down this path if marketing is your only focus. However, if we don't build a system that can support from awareness to purchasing, then we're screwed. Okay, you don't even have a system to begin with. So you have to do that first. And this documentation is great for that. So you have the optimization, which is getting that straight path from awareness to revenue to support whatever your processes might look like, okay? This is if you're doing a full system implementation or if you're doing one part of your process, which might just be sales, okay? The process is the same. Optimal processes first, that's O and OAD. Then automation. So after you have optimal processes, the nice thing is because you represented your system so perfectly with this documentation, you can say, okay, this part of the process can be automated. Okay, we don't need a human to do it. So for example, let me go through here. This is a B2C. Okay, team member sends the invoice via Zoho Books. We can look at that and say, you know what? We need to automate that. And you can strategically automate. Many people will automate things. They'll spend all this effort. They'll throw all this time, this development power, this money at an automation. And I'm sitting there like, your biggest problem is in marketing. You don't even have money coming through the door and you're trying to plug these holes in customer success. What are you doing? Like, you've got to solve problems upstream, your biggest problems first, because there's always going to be problems in business, okay? and you have to let some fires burn to put out the major ones. And so you can't automate everything all at once, which means you have to make a decision. And when you have to make decisions, and there's lots of different things you can do, being strategic is making the best decisions. It's prioritizing. So if you want to prioritize, you have to have something to go off of. And this is the best kind of documentation you can base your decisions off of, because you can look through and say, this can be automated. This is what I do with my clients. I document the process and I say, this can be automated. This can be automated. And they don't even know. Half the time they're like, I had no idea Zoho had a feature like that. I had no idea Zoho had an app for that. And I'm like, yes, I do this every single day. This can be automated. This can be automated. And they say, well, this can be automated too. And I say, it can, but I don't think we should do that initially at this stage in Zoho's development for you. It just doesn't make sense. And then I'll make a case for it. Okay. So that's optimization, which is, what is the ideal world between your business and Zoho? What does the ideal world look like? How do you interact with it? What does your processes look like? And I try to do a top-down format like this, written so everyone understands it. Everyone understands, okay, this is when I'm going to do this. Oh, okay, and this is how Zoho does this. Okay, and then they can go through the system in their head, and they can read it. And the whole organization can have the access to the document if needed, so they can use it almost like an SOP. Okay. So that's optimization. Then automation, which is saying, hey, this can be done by a human, but it should be done by Zoho because Zoho can automate it. I could go down this rabbit hole and like these 3 different factors that determine why you want to do an automation. But I think, well, I'll just touch on it. So there's frequency, complexity, and then how much time it takes. So if you're frequently doing something that's extremely complicated and takes a lot of time, that's first on the chopping block to see what parts of that process you can start to automate, okay? And then also you could put an automation, if you're trying to be strategic, you could also say, well, what takes us, what would be most impactful for the business and takes the least amount of time? Okay, that's also a really good frame of reference for what to automate, because if it doesn't take you much time to automate and it's going to be super impactful for the business, then that should be first on the chopping block. And then if you use the reverse logic, if something takes is going to take you forever to automate, it's going to have 0 impact on the business. Why would you put that at the top of your list? It just wouldn't make any sense. You'd be shocked how many businesses I see do that. It's like 1 out of 10 impact for their business and 10 out of 10 effort to automate, or they'll build something crazy in Creator that can be done in a Zoho app. And I'm like, this is wild to see how much inefficiency and waste goes into developing systems like this. Okay. That's automation. And then you have, and by the way, I'm not trying to make anyone sound stupid. It's kind of unfair because all I do all day is run around in Zoho and develop things and build systems. But it's just really frustrating because I sit there and I'm rolling my eyes. I'm like, this is, well, and that's probably what the business owner or business leader or organization leaders think when they hire me, is they're like, we've made a mess of this thing. It's just crazy to watch. Third thing is delegation. Okay. So if you're a business leader, business owner, organization leader, someone who has impactful work that they wish they were spending more time on, but they're busy doing things that are low on the totem pole of impact for the business, right? The menial tasks, the things you're doing that you're like, I should be doing something else, right? Not anyone, but I could offload this to somebody and I should. If you have that feeling, that pull, and you understand that, and guess what? If you're a business leader, business owner, organization leader, you actually do need to do that. If you want to focus and make more impact on the business, you need to offload those things that aren't working for you. Well, because you documented things like this, if you did, or have a document like this, you can start to offload. And I have a very specific structure that I like for doing this. I'm going to show you this demo SMS here, or LMS. So an LMS is a learning management system, but you can see my SOPs are in a very similar format. I do the same thing. And you might think this is overkill. You might think to yourself, Drew, that's how it works for you, but that's not how it works for me or in my organization. And you're wrong. I've done this for over 141 organizations at one level of detail or another. For many organizations exactly like this across different countries, in different continents. It works, okay? It is the best way to do this at scale. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I'm not going to include 100% of the detail here, and I'm not asking you to. Actually, we're going to go down the rabbit hole on it because I think it's really important. I think you should do 20% of the steps that give you 80% of the understanding of how to do a process because of the 80-20 rule, which states that 20% of the inputs are giving you 80% of your output, okay? So there's a lot of ways to interpret the 80-20 rule, but you probably heard it before. So this is the 20% of the input you're putting in these steps to give you 80% of the results you want, which is an effectively completed task. Because I don't want you to try to do a screenshot-based screenshot flow. You're not going to change that. That's not a sustainable pace in an organization to document the processes. But I'll tell you what, I also think you need a video. And this is the best way to kick off or delegate a process. So for example, in my organization, I don't like creating SOPs. Okay, so this is the delegation piece. And to back up even a little more, this is the piece in which if you get wrong, you can't get anything right in Zoho, unless you want to be a team of one and you don't want to be a genius with 1,000 slaves you're just ordering around. You want people to be trained and equipped so that they can eventually take on the systems. And yeah, you get what I mean by that. So the key thing to understand here, if you want to get delegation right, okay, you want to first create a video, a Loom video. And this is what I do with my assistant. I create a video, I send it to my assistant, and I say, hey, go through this video and write out the processes. Now, this is kind of meta because I have a SOP on how to create an SOP. So I don't just give them the video and say, write out the processes. I have a video with a process on how to write out the processes because I want it done correctly. And I don't want to be there to hold someone's hand every time they create an SOP. So this is the best way to take myself and duplicate myself across the organization. Next thing to understand here, I don't create the procedure, they create the procedure, right? So I send them a video, a Loom video like this. And then I also send them a link to this SOP on creating SOPs. And I say, look through the SOP on creating SOPs, look through the video, and then create me an SOP, then ping me when it's done. I'm going to take a look at it. And then once they do that, they've seen me do the process from start to finish. They've written it out from start to finish, about 20% of the steps to give them 80% of our understanding when they refer back to it. And so now they have it. And you might think that's crazy, but I promise once you start doing this, there's different things that pop up that you're like, oh, I'm doing this every single week and I don't want to do this import, this thing in Zoho, this thing not even in Zoho, whatever. And you're going to be like, I need to offload this. And in that moment, you will use Loom, you'll hit your hotkey, you'll record a video, you'll send it to someone and say, hey, I'd like you, and you can steal my SOP. You can use this URL, you can use this. I give them to all my clients and say, here's a standard operating procedure on how to create SOPs. And here's a video of a procedure that I'd like documented. Please document it. Then they'll do it, and then you can offload it to that person or somebody else because the video serves as the first version, okay? Back to our principles before. If the document you're building to represent your processes isn't modifiable over time, that's a problem. So I want to give you the best of both worlds. The video gives you enough detail, anyone to get the gist of the task, to see how it was initially completed. But the procedure is the most current version. So yes, you can choose to update the Loom videos if it's a very important task, but that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to kick it off. So people want to refer to the video to see, how was this initially done? Okay, got it. How do we do it now? Okay, well, over time you can evolve it. Then you can, checklist isn't completely necessary. If you want to add it, these two sections are. But don't try to be like, don't think to yourself, I'm going to go above and beyond every single time, because then it's not sustainable. And if you're not consistently creating these things and offloading, then you're completely missing the point of why this is important. Okay. So that's the final step, is delegation. And so OAD, optimize, automate, delegate. If you consistently scan over those three things, then you are going to get the most out of Zoho. You're going to automate your business. You're going to delegate the things that are not worth your time. And what I mean by that is you can focus on impactful work and make bigger positive changes in the organization and for your customers and whoever you're serving, as opposed to doing things that literally anyone else could do and people are willing to do for you because they may not want to do the impactful work. They don't even care. And so that's how you can offload. So OAD, that's the best system to build a system in Zoho. Here's the harsh reality of Zoho. Zoho is only as good as its implementation, and the implementation of Zoho is only as good as the person who led its implementation. And the implementation in Zoho is all for nothing if you and the people using the system aren't trained to use it. Okay, so that's kind of the order of importance. Number one, the implementation is only as good as, or Zoho is only as good as its implementation. And the nice thing about Zoho is because it's it's not as costly as other options. You can reinvest what you would have spent in other systems in actually implementing it correctly. Okay, that's the nice thing, right? So that's the first thing in the order of importance, is Zoho is only as good as its implementation. Second thing, the implementation is only as good as the person implementing it. So you got two options, or a couple options. Your first option, what most people start with, is I got this. Okay, right? Like I built my website. I'm like, I got this. I hated it. And then we just did another website launch and it looks amazing because I had some expert do it. Okay. And I got in way over my head and I was like, I want to do all these things and I'm not capable, but I could then, it was awesome because the website, the people who built my website, it was like a broker. I go to them and I'm explaining things like I'm 5 years old. I don't understand anything. And they're like, we know exactly what you want. And then they built it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I wanted. This is perfect. Okay. So they were able to take limited information and build out a system for me. Okay. And the website truly is a system, just like Zoho would be a system for you. So that's the first thing. The next thing is, unfortunately, Zoho is, so that's really your first option. The second option is you can find an expert like I did for my website. And this is where I obviously am biased because I'm a Zoho expert. But if you value your time, then you'll hire an expert. If you value your money, you will do it yourself. Okay, so it's just what you value. I'm getting to the point now where I value my time more. So I spend money so that other people can save me time. It just depends where you're at in your journey. Okay. The next thing is, even if you implement Zoho perfectly, guys, it's all for nothing if people don't know how to use the system. And that's where documentation, delegation, training, all of these things come into play. Like, you can't have this system even work at all if it was built correctly. And that's the thing, people spend so much energy and time building this automated system. And then they start throwing people into it. And then they are the bottleneck because they're the ones who have to train everybody. And they're like, now I just gave myself another job instead of setting up a system that can train people on how to use it. And so this is obviously all at a very high level, but the details and the nuance here are very important. And so this saying, Zoho is only as good as its implementation, the implementation only as good as the person leading the implementation, and then the implementation is for nothing and people aren't trained, just helps you understand what has to be done in order to even have a shot at being successful in Zoho. Now, there are no guarantees that this system will work. However, you can do so much that it becomes unreasonable for the system not to work for you. And those are the things I'm explaining in this video, because a lot of videos kind of jump into the tech of Zoho, which is great. I do a lot of that too. But this video is more for what are the principles which, if you adhere to, you are much more likely to be successful, because I can't guarantee it's going to work for you, the organization. I don't even know what you sell. I don't know what you do, so it's difficult. But I do know these principles. I've had 141 plus reps of doing this. So these are the principles that have stood out to me as I've worked with many clients. I'm like, these are just the harsh realities that in a 5-minute YouTube video, I can tell you about Zoho, but I can't get real with you on how these things work. Okay. So that's the thing I wanted to express to you. Zoho, only as good as the implementation. Zoho is a great system, but it's only as good as you implement it for your business. That all depends on who is leading the implementation. And just to go a footnote in that, the better you find somebody that knows business processes and Zoho technical, they can get technical with Zoho. The better they are at both those things, the better implementation you're going to have. Okay. And then I guess I'd add another footnote underneath that. It's the processes that are relevant to your business. Because if they know a bunch of processes for business that's irrelevant to you, they can draw upon those things. And that really comes down to discovery too, not even prior experience, but how good are they at discovering your objectives, your processes, and the gaps in your processes. Okay. And then how good are they able to say, based on how we assess the organization, and they're doing prescription without diagnosis is malpractice, or in other words, they are discovering your objectives and processes and gaps before they prescribe you with optimal processes for the organization. The better they can do that, and the better they understand how to code in Zoho, run reports, understand the apps and features, the better they understand those things. And it will always come down to that. There is no shortcut for that. You can try to find someone on Fiverr or Upwork and Jimmy rig it and give it limited time. You're going to get what you put into it. Okay. So I'm just giving you the reality. You can make up an excuse not to do it that way and do that, but it's really only affecting you. Okay. So that's on you to decide. And then the last part is the training. you've got to you've got to do all three. Implement it correctly, find the right person to implement it, and train. But training is so critical and it's so overlooked. It's like the thing that is extremely important that nobody does. And just think about every job you've ever had. How many people were great at training you? How many people gave you SOPs? No one does this stuff. So when people do it and do it correctly and don't create this system for training that isn't sustainable, when they do create a sustainable training system, it transforms the organization, the productivity. It allows business owners, business leaders, organization leaders to take off the shackles of all these menial tasks and focus on those things that they've always wanted to focus on, but they just don't have enough time. Okay, so the more you value your time, the more you're going to do, the more you're going to train. And you just want to knock down the first domino and then do a review after for training, right? If you watched prior in this video, I talk about more of the tactical of how I do the training with Loom videos and kicking it off. You need to do it that way. You need to do it in a sustainable format. You cannot try to write all these things out yourself. Part of delegation is being able to delegate the process of creating standard operating procedures, and then you just recording the procedures and sending them out, and then training other people to do the same. So it's this compound interest effect on training if you do it correctly. Okay, so I beat a dead horse, but you get it. Zoho is only as good as its implementation. The implementation is only as good as the person implementing the system. And then if you implement Zoho perfectly, but you fail to train your team, then the whole thing is for nothing. The more and more that I implement Zoho, the more I err on the side of more detail, okay? And the reason why is because clarity precedes execution. You can't execute, you can't do things without clearly understanding the steps that must be taken, okay? But detail precedes clarity. So if you're vague and you're not specific, then you can't execute because you don't know what you specifically need to do in order to execute something, to actually do it. But in order to have the clarity, you need to have the detail. Okay, and that's where I have detailed documentation. The reason that I bring that up, there's so many people that come to me and they're like, Zoho can do all these things, but I don't know what level of detail to get into. And I'm like, initially, you're going to err on the side of more detail. Okay. And what I used to have people do is fill out this journey map. And this is still a great exercise. It really is. It gets you thinking about the stages. But what I've realized is when I'd have people create these stages for their buyer journey or their customer journey, then they would put it into a system like Zoho, and it wouldn't really match their processes. And I was thinking, well, where do they need to start? Like, how do we solve this problem? Well, the way you solve the problem is you get into the detailed step-by-step, because people will conflate two things in a system all the time, especially with this part of the system being their Kanban boards, right? And this is a great view. It helps you see your data in relation to your processes. They conflate the stage with the step. So I'll see people put literally every step of a process in the Kanban board. I actually see that a lot. You should not have more than 7 stages. You should keep it 4 to 7 stages per Kanban board. Anything less than 4, it doesn't give you real insight as to where things are at in a process. Anything more than 7 is too much. It's just going to get unwieldy. It's not going to be very usable. Okay. So what's the difference between a stage and a step? Well, a step is a specific thing that needs to be done in a process, okay? It's a certain action that needs to be taken. A stage is a general phase of the process, and it's useful because it gives you an idea of where something is at, right? So a sales-ready lead, that's not necessarily a step that you need to take. It just means it helps you look and say, these leads are ready for me to sell. A step would be to click into the lead and to call them, and then to email them, and then to DM them on LinkedIn or whatever my cadence might look like. Okay, those are the steps. The cadence would actually be the steps if you know anything about sales cadences. So you don't want to conflate the stage and the step, but you get the stages from the steps. Okay, so what informs what? And you do the kind of this game of like, what's going to inform the stages, the steps? Okay, what's going to inform the steps? Well, your knowledge of Zoho and other business processes. What informs your knowledge of business processes in Zoho? Well, for Zoho, it's how many videos you've watched on Zoho, which probably is what brought you to me. And what informs your knowledge of all these business processes? Well, your experience, okay? So someone with a lot of experience in different business processes and in Zoho is going to be able to then have positive downstream effects in that journey, right? If you know Zoho really well, you know Zoho processes, then you're going to know better steps for a specific organization or use case or area of a business which is going to help you then create the better stages for the business. Okay. So it's like going down the rabbit hole. Okay. So people are like, well, what stage do you take? Well, we need, let's look at the steps. I don't have the steps. Create the steps. Well, how do we create better steps? Well, you need, and then you just keep going on and on. So that's the thing. Start at the step level. This is the best starting place, and get detailed. Now, the detailed temptation kind of leads to flowchart documentation. But I think that's just an easy way out, because flowcharts look, I don't know. I don't want to like rag on flowcharts because people spend all this time, and I'm like, we can use it, but it's not detailed enough, and it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just the reality of the situation is we can't use it. We have to get even more detailed. And discovery is about getting this kind of detail extracted so that you can create visuals, which look nice, and they can give you different perspectives on a system. They are useful, but for me, and for my clients, and for everyone I've ever worked with, the more detail, the better. Okay. And then I'll give you some balance here, because you don't want to feel this this huge burden of having to screenshot by screenshot flow everything. Okay. So to give yourself a balance, and you're like, well, I'd love to spend all day documenting every little detail, every little process, but I can't. Just do 80-20, 20% of the steps that give you 80% of understanding of how to do something. If you know anything about the 80-20 rule, 20% input, 80% output, okay? That will exist at some degree in everything that you do. So do that here. And then for me, I don't even create my SOPs. I just send them to my assistant and they create them for me. And I have an SOP on creating SOPs, so it's done correctly every single time, okay? So that is what I would recommend here. Detail precedes clarity, clarity precedes execution. So if you want to execute like a professional inside of a system, if you want to do things correctly, if you want to do things efficiently, and you want to implement a system effectively, you need clarity. You need to be clear. Everyone needs to be clear on what's going on. If you want people to be clear on what's going on, get into the detail, okay? Because when the people actually have to use the system, they're going to need something detailed to go off of. And if they don't, guess who they're going to come to? You. And you don't want to be the bottleneck of the system. You want to be able to have the system work for you instead of you work for the system. There's a million things that you can do inside of Zoho, none of which are worth doing unless they support your objectives and processes. Now, you may think to yourself, well, I need to know all those things so that I can invent my objectives and processes. That is putting the cart before the horse. Your processes should stem from the objectives that you have in the organization, which stems from really the vision and value that you're trying to create. And that might sound like woo-woo and whatever, Drew, but if you are obsessed with creating value, which is creating the things that people want, because that's really what value is, then your processes should all be supporting that. And everything supporting your processes in Zoho should be focused on supporting all the things you do inside of Zoho should support your processes and objectives. Everything else, it's just spending time developing things that aren't extremely valuable, okay? So that's number one. Number two, a principle that's really important to understand is the preferable problem principle. And the idea is that you are only going to trade problems in business in an organization, okay? One problem for the next. So as a prereq, you should be obsessed with solving problems because it's just gonna make your life a little more fun and less dreading everything and thinking everything's broken. So the thing to understand about Zoho is the preferable problem principle essentially states that solving problems upstream, because you're gonna have 50 different fires and you can only put out 2, okay? Or something like that. And so if you put out the fires at the beginning of the process, upstream of the process, it has positive downstream effects. So when you write out your processes, just to make this a little more real for you, one of the problems I didn't want in my organization is the lead problem, not having leads. I had consulted so many organizations that didn't have leads. And so we would rally Zoho's functionality and features and apps around that problem. Okay, let's get you some leads. And to solve that problem, I make videos like this, right? And they give me lots of leads. But then I still have another problem. These leads come in the door, and then I have to get resources behind me, people, talented people, automation, so that I can actually handle and help all of those leads, okay? But the preferable problem to have is too many leads coming in the door. You can't make the argument that that's worse to have more leads, okay? But then once you have leads and you can start serving all those leads, then you have to get more talent. And then once you get talent, there's another problem. You have to train all of them. Okay, so it just keeps going down. So you can see if you start upstream and you work your way down, you want to solve the problems upstream more. So two things. There's a million things you can do inside of Zoho, none of which are worth doing unless they support the processes and the objectives in the organization. But then there's a problem. You can't support all the processes and all the objectives of the organization at once. So you must prioritize. So the question of prioritization is, what's going to be first on the list? Strategy, prioritization, same thing. What's at the top? What's at the top usually is what's at the top also of your processes. And it just depends. It depends on the resources that your organization has. But once I document processes, I usually look at the top and I say, well, if we can blow up the lead gen here, if we can increase the effectiveness of generating leads, handling leads, tracking new business, whether I'm working B2C, B2C, B2B, whatever it might is, the more that we, and it's just like, this is what they train you to do in content too. It's like if you're making a reel, it's like the first 2 seconds are the most important. It's this preferable problem principle. If you shift your focus upwards, you're going to get positive downstream effects. So then you're going to have problems solve itself downstream. The reason I bring this up at all, I've had a lot of clients that they're obsessed with their customer service or some operations downstream, which are still extremely critical, but it's not the main bottleneck of the organization. Their main bottleneck is they don't have leads coming in the door, or they do have leads, but then they aren't able to sell them, which is, so it's like you've got to shift your attention over that. It doesn't mean you ignore customer service, but you have such a finite amount of time and energy and an unlimited amount of things that you can do. So you have to stay focused on something and develop in one area, or everything's going to fall apart. So with that, there's a million things you can do in Zoho, none of which are worth doing unless they support processes and objectives. That's why earlier in this video, I went over how to document the processes so you knew where to focus your time and attention. And then number 2, preferable problem principle. If you're wondering, what do I prioritize? Look upstream as a general rule of thumb. Look upstream and then work your way down, because if you work upstream, there's positive downstream effects. Let's talk about Gall's Law. Gall's Law is one of my favorite principles when it comes to building systems. And Gall's Law states that you can't adopt a complex working system before you adopt a simple working system. Now, there's some nuance here, because you can still implement an advanced system that automates your business, integrates your technology stack, and is still, although it's advanced, you can still adopt it. But you can't adopt a complex system before you adopt a simple system and then grow into it. Now, when I say that, you may think to yourself, well, I need to start with something really simple then. Let's just go do a platform, I don't know, like Pipedrive. That's, a simple CRM, or Close. There's Close.io. There's a bunch of these smaller CRMs that people are like, I don't want to get more than I need. I'm going to start with this. The problem with that, though, that people run into and they don't realize it until later on is, and you may think this, I have a lot of people come to me and they've already understood this, but they'll jump into a simple system like that. And because there's less capacity, they hit the ceiling of what the platform can do for them very early on. And so you have to balance two things. You want a very capable platform, the most capable platform that you can pay for. And that's the other thing too. I'm going to go on a little bit of a side tangent. Why pay more for a platform if they're like Zoho has 50 plus applications, then you have Salesforce and HubSpot? I'm like, why pay 10 times more for half as much? I just don't get it. I can never wrap my head around it. I could get it if you're going to get a Ferrari, because there's some value in that. Like, people see a Ferrari, they're like, wow, they don't need all that horsepower, but it's amazing, right? No one cares what system you have, where you're throwing your data. I think some people care. They're like, I'm a diehard. No, I've never met someone who's diehard Salesforce, but diehard on other platforms. People are super diehard on Zoho too, which I think is great. But when I look at Zoho and I'm like, let's take the emotion away. I'm like, logically, it's just the best in that it has the most amount of features and functionality for the least amount of cost and the best track record over time. So then it just becomes an obvious choice. With that, I digress. Gall's Law. You can still adopt a platform that has lots of capabilities. You just can't adopt all the capabilities at once. You must have a focus on your processes first and be very pragmatic with your processes. Or in other words, be realistic. What is this? Don't bite off more than you can chew. Look at the processes. Don't try to over implement. If you don't have the resources to do it, or the time, or the energy, attention, or people, don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Take your optimal processes and put it into Zoho and just try to get started with a simple working system. Now, what a simple working system might be for someone who's techie is going to be completely different from a simple working system for someone who struggles to jump on a Zoom call. Okay, no judgment. I've been there. But when people aren't techie, they're going to start with a slimmed down or much simpler version of Zoho, but they can still grow into it. The nice thing is Zoho has a lot of room for growth. That's usually why people are like, I need to start on this thing, because I can anticipate that if I go to a small platform that I'm going to grow out of it and then I'm going to have to migrate, which is such a pain to do the migration process. It's possible. It's just a pain. It's a lot of change. So that's a critical thing to understand about Zoho is Gall's law. Any attempt to adopt a complex working system before adopting a simple working system will fail. Applies to everything in life, but it's hyper relevant to Zoho. So make sure that you don't bite off more than you chew, and you just focus on the most critical, simple working systems that you can put into Zoho initially.